So I've been reading up a lot lately on the history of the lead up to the Civil War, which was the last time that I think the country was so divided on a single issue. And I see a lot of parallels between that period in history and the modern period, the modern era, where the issue of obviously rampant inequality, um, bottomless capitalism, hyper crony capitalism that just eats itself by really destroying the fabric of society, of civilized society. Um, Drawing the parallel between this moment that we're in, this moment where this problem has been amplified, this problem of income inequality and political corruption and political inequality and systemic um, uh, the systemic disconnect between the lives of the vast majority relative to the very select privileged few versus what was going on circa 1854 when the Kansas-Nebraska Act was signed that pushed basically tensions on the issue of slavery between the Northern Whigs, which then became the radical Republicans, because at the time, the Republicans were the left, and the extremist Southern Democrats. At the time, the Democrats were the Republicans. Um, and the way that this issue really sort of came to a head following the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was when basically extremists uh, in the South uh, repealed the Missouri Compromise, which was basically the agreement that the two parties had come to some 30 years prior, outlining a geographical boundary from which to the north slavery was not to be expanded. And what happened in that moment when in 1854, during the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Southerners decided to renege on that promise, and they had a majority control of the Congress, and voted that actually this idea of putting the matter to a vote in the provinces, because this is when they were pushing to expand federal expand the Southerners their territory, uh, to expand their territory west into previously unorganized, unoccupied territory. And so, what to do with the question of slavery? Would those lands be pro-slave, or would they be like the North, which of course, up to a certain geographical boundary, was free? Uh, so the 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 Southern Democrats went ahead and very controversially reneged on that agreement. They repealed the matter, and then the issue was taken to the Supreme Court, which was again Democrat majority, and then they ruled a couple years later in 1857 that actually the black man had, first of all, no constitutional right that the white man was bound to respect, and that Congress had absolutely no constitutional authority to go ahead and dictate, impose limits on federal lands with respect to the question of slavery. So those extremist positions combined with those actions radicalized the left, which again at the time were the Northern Republicans, which grew out of the Whigs, which were towing that. Previously, the Whig Party, up until about 1854, was trying to toe that moderate, centrist-y, you know, make everybody happy line that the current day Democratic Party seems to constantly be obsessing over playing that role. Same kind of deal. And then of course tensions hit came to a head, and as we all know, Abraham Lincoln ran, staunchly opposed to slavery. The Republicans, their entire platform was built on widespread, unilateral, total opposition to slavery, and a civil war was declared and waged. And then we all know the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves via executive action. And then, of course, we all know that then there was a basically wholesale, almost Renaissance era in which the Constitution was dramatically revamped to extend basically the Bill of Rights, in terms of due process, citizenship, equal protection under the law, as well as obviously abolition, codify abolition into law, voting rights, political rights, to previously disenfranchised and dehumanized group of Black Americans. So, radical extremism from one side became, and there was also the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act, which was also a part of that Kansas-Nebraska bill, which basically made it so that any escaped slaves, from which there were, I think, thousands, at least thousands or hundreds of thousands a year by that point, that would make their way to the north to free territory, were then basically have their rights to habeas corpus, which is like due process, suspended, as so long as someone from the South, a slave owner, alleged that person was their property, they would basically have their freedom revoked and without a jury. And this meant that, of course, a freed Black person could just on hearsay become enslaved. And so again, you see, the lines were drawn that the previous moderates, the Whigs, thought were a bridge too far, and they pushed back emphatically and resoundingly, and we had a war. And I'm thinking about how extreme capitalism has gotten in current society, in present day society, with respects to corporate the corporate capture of both parties, not just the Republicans but the Democrats as well, the corporate wing, which obviously up to this point, you see Joe Biden just became elected president, still retains majority control of the party. And thinking to myself how we could be at a fork in the road in history right now, given how much the issue of COVID, the public health crisis associated with COVID, and the of course related economic fallout, the economic aspect, the way it's accelerated income inequality and political inequality and economic inequality, and just basically systemic structural rot, just crony capitalism at every level, where the rich, the largest corporations, the wealthiest among us, the slimmest percentage of Americans at the top have gotten wealthier and seen their wealth expand, while everyone else has gotten poorer, has either lost their jobs or seen their job prospects decline, drowned further in debt, as they've lost their health care, to further exacerbate matters. Previously, prior to the pandemic, we had some 30 million Americans unemployed, and then of course with the pandemic, I think it's something like between 10 to 17 million that have lost their insurance, where previously it was 30 million uninsured. So just one problem after another, and I'm thinking that how this Biden administration plays it, there are some promising signs. Apparently the National Economic Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, is for the first time ever comprised entirely of economic of labor economists, which is really promising. It's apparently, I don't think it's ever happened before, and this means that these are people who have not only the expertise in being familiar with the trappings of the problems faced by working people in this country, but also that they have the political acumen, the sort of political expertise, the experience in knowing how to finesse the necessary branches, the necessary parties in government in order to advance an agenda. So that's promising. But there are also signs that the Biden administration might be tone deaf, might not be willing to rise, might not have the political will necessarily to rise to the enormous challenge facing them from day one of their administration. The rhetoric has been really underwhelming. That's something I've discussed here before. Is that Biden, as the president, has basically a level of executive authority that we didn't realize that he had. That the wonderful journalists at the American Prospect have recently done great work to uncover, to fully document for us the full extent of the executive authority available to the incoming administration, given the vast array of laws that already exist that are just sitting there waiting to be tapped into, that can do many things for people, like provide them with Medicare for all, or debt cancellation, or relief on exorbitant drug prices, break up big banks, disrupt, if not outright abolish, corporate consolidation and anti-competitive monopolistic practices from the most dominant players in various industry markets. So given that the president has that unilateral authority, and that Biden has been hyped up by the media as like the second coming of FDR during the primary, you would hope to see some level of ambition and seriousness, serious level of commitment on that scale, exuded from the administration. And the rhetoric from Biden has been very underwhelming. He seems to be content, from what I've seen and heard, to work through the House of Representatives, work through the Congress, which, as we all know, the Democrats control the House, but the Republicans currently control and likely could continue to control under a Biden administration the Senate, in which case, of course, we have a split branches of government politically, in which case we all know how that plays out historically. See the last 2 years of the Obama and Trump administrations as the latest example in terms of gridlock and unproductivity. But then you also have the Senate Democrats taking the sort of same line of, well, let's just see what happens. Let's not assume the worst case scenario. And even if we do assume the worst case scenario, who's to say Republicans won't play ball? So just this totally unwarranted, unearned willingness to give to cut Republicans, who are obviously bad faith actors, some slack, and be generous in granting their in basically their perception, their impression of their willingness to be good faith public officials. Frankly, Senate Democrats are talking about, well, when it comes to the cabinet, we've got to wait and see. Progressives are being too rash in asserting that perhaps the Democrats should be prepared to exert whatever current legal mechanisms are available to them to bypass the Senate, which is actually something that is totally normal historically, has been done by previous administrations, including Trump most recently. simply bypassing the Senate on cabinet appointments, to exploiting loopholes, to basically tap so-called acting cabinet posts from the transition team, just making them permanent, and by just simply keeping them on. It's just simple things that simple tools in the tool chest that are available to the Senate Democrats on the cabinet, or to President Biden on matters like debt cancellation. He's talking about, well, let's see what the House has to say. There's this bill to cancel a 10K broadly, versus, there's a Senate resolution being proposed by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, which matters quite a bit, actually, that it come from the Senate Minority Leader, and as well as Elizabeth Warren, to cancel, no, make it 50K broadly, or, as the American Prospect has documented, you can cancel all of the $1.5 trillion in student debt owed to the federal government. And you can just do that simply by directing your Department of Education secretary, I should say, to opt simply not to collect, and to direct the IRS not to impose a tax penalty on that additional income earned for student borrowers who would be relieved of, obviously, a life-crushing burden at a time when they're coming out of school and should be looking for a job, trying to get their career started, drowning in debt, and now a depression, and obviously a scarce job market. So the rhetoric has been, I think, mostly underwhelming thus far. It's still very early, true, but these next 4 years, I really think, are going to be reflected on by historians and academics and scholars and people interested in politics as a fork in the road. I'm not sure if it'll be remembered in the same way as the Civil War was, as we remember the Civil War today, with respects to, wow, what a turning point in American constitutional history and in American democracy. Like, what a precedent was set. I'm one who's in total favor of, a similar review of the Constitution, a similar principle of, let's really strengthen the Constitution. What's missing? Let's make voting rights more accessible. Everyone over the age of 18 has a constitutional right to vote. And any laws, any laws that would be prohibitive of that are strictly illegal. Let's get money out of politics. Let's do an amendment, banning big money, so that our politicians, our elected officials, are not entirely beholden to corporate and special interests and the wealthiest, as they are now, so that you can move to a public finance system of elections, in which vouchers, $100, your local government, your city matches up to 3-1 or 5-1, so that, again, it's an even playing field with a hard cap on the number of total dollars allowed for a contributor to give, let's say $2,000 or something like that. So we need to seriously look to codify beyond simple statutes that can be overturned by an ideological Supreme Court with its own political agenda. We need to go beyond statutes and be looking to codify these really core democratic tenets into the Constitution in the way that we did in the aftermath of the Civil War. Again, at the time, the Supreme Court had just ruled that the black man has no right that the white man is bound to recognize, and we freed the slaves and then gave them due process, citizenship, equal protection under the law. We gave them voting rights. Voting rights, of course, were very short-lived because, again, a reactionary Supreme Court basically regained power short time later. But we did have a Reconstruction period that saw astounding democratic growth, and we saw a racial transfer of wealth in this country unlike we'd ever seen previously or since, quite frankly. We saw so much gain. We even saw black people running for everything from mayor and sheriff to, U.S. Congress, senator, governor, state governor. So on every imaginable level, we saw segregation struck down. Again, that was short-lived. But we desegregated. We did so much in such a short period, like a 12-year period of time, the Reconstruction, the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, that it's difficult for me to imagine that it's impossible for us, that it's sort of revealed. Ryan Grimm spoke about this in his book, We've Got People, from AOC to Jesse Jackson, The End of Big Money and the Start and the Rise of a Movement. A great book. I recommend you guys read it. This is actually from his foreword, where he talks about how basically what that period in American history did was to basically expose the cynical lie that change on a grand scale was not achievable through government, so through electoral politics. So I really feel like at this point, the issue has obviously evolved. We're no longer talking about slavery. We're now talking about systemic economic and political inequality and rampant political corruption on a scale which I think is just gotten way out of control. And now with the depression arising out of the public health crisis and the matter of we're not doing a UBI, we need to be looking at $2,000 a month. We need to be looking at a jobs investment program, job training. Again, there's a Green New Deal on the table in the House on a bill for a Green New Deal, obviously a mass national jobs creation program, jobs guarantee. We need to be looking at affordable housing, universal public housing, universal rent control, with a commitment to build public housing on a mass scale. So many things that we need to basically be striving towards during the next 4 years of the Biden leadership. And I'm hoping some of the personnel that Biden is staffing up his cabinet with thus far inspires some hope, some not so much. Neera Tanden, as the head of management and budget, she's historically been, as president of CAP, the Center for American Progress, a deficit hawk, but has lately backed off of that in recent years. So again, not sure what to expect there. Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. I like Janet Yellen. During her time as Federal Reserve Chair under Obama, she very innovatively and rightly chose to lower interest rates after a strong calls from the left to do so. That helped the job market. That helped people. Get jobs, reduced unemployment. So Janet Yellen she's okay in my book, but is she going to be left enough, or is she going to be more center left as Treasury Secretary? She's also got a deputy that we know is far more conservative, Wally Adeyemo, as Deputy Treasury Secretary. So is he there to offset any progressive inclinations that Yellen may have at the Treasury? Rahm Emanuel is being floated for trade representative. Rahm Emanuel, again, a deficit hawk. This is a man who made it his mission to tank the first 2 years of the Obama presidency as Obama's right-wing chief of staff. Did a lot to stand in the way of progress when it came to both the stimulus negotiations on the Obama stimulus, to a public option on the Affordable Care Act, which obviously should have been included if you accept the premise that the Affordable Care Act was the compromise. And then of course we got a half measure on top of a half measure. Rahm Emanuel was a very active participant in seeing that come to be. What he was complicit in the regression of progress under Obama, and previously helped to jumpstart the big dollar fundraisers as a campaign advisor of the Clinton campaign in '92. So he revolutionized politics in the worst way possible by basically finding the most efficient ways of raising money from rich people and selling out to the wealthy and to the biggest donors in the room, selling, that whole thing of $11,000 plates at these big dollar fundraisers, wine cave type events, most famously Pete Buttigieg, the Pete Buttigieg wine cave iteration. All that stems from Rahm Emanuel. And then, of course, in between, he did some time on Wall Street where he made himself, I think, something like tens of millions of dollars in between Clinton and his role in Congress, which in Congress is head of the DCCC. Basically started the practice of recruiting conservative, the most right-wing profile of Democrats in order to defeat Republicans, which actually did give the Democrats control of the House in 2006, but then look at everything that's happened since. So for the Democrats, electorally, they lost over 1,000 seats in the 8 years under Obama at the federal, state, and local level combined. So Rahm Emanuel, not somebody that I want in my cabinet if I'm a progressive who's serious about governance and addressing urgent progressive agenda items, economic items, top line priorities for the country, for the economy. So, maybe I'm being, I don't want to be too cynical, guys. Again, I want to give Neera Tanden the benefit of the doubt. Let's see how much she's evolved on her previous be all end all philosophy of deficit hawkery is everything. Rahm Emanuel, I'm not too happy about. Tony Blinken as secretary of state secretary. Not too crazy about Blinken. A bit of a war hawk, that one. So we gotta see what's going on. But I just was thinking, are the progressives in the Democrats, are they likely to radicalize the Democratic Party in the way that the Republican wing of the Whig Party did back then? Are the Democrats on the verge of a similar type of accelerated development and evolution on the scale that the Whigs were in that 6-year period leading up to the start of the Civil War? Beginning with the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. Are we in that period where we're about to see a radical transformation of the Democratic Party, led by obviously the progressive wing of the party, in service of really aggressively and seriously responding to the challenge at hand? I don't know.